Okay, so you know Poland, right? Even if you don't, this is fascinating. Like, we're talking about political shifts and alliances. You know how some countries seem to be really steady in their political leanings?
Right.
Well, get this. Poland has actually swung back and forth,
Yeah.
like between being super pro-democracy and then showing signs of, authoritarianism.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pendulum swing. And today we're going to deep dive into this whole thing.
Exactly. We're going to see how those changes played out on the world stage,
Yeah.
like with their relationships with other countries and stuff.
It's a good one.
So first, let's set the scene. Like, think back to 1989. Poland breaks free from communist rule. It's a huge moment.
Right.
What pushed them so hard to be like, hey, we want to be part of NATO, we want to be in the EU?
I mean, you can imagine, after being under Soviet influence for so long, there was this major desire to align with like Western Europe and the United States. I mean, both in terms of like shared values
Yeah.
and, also just plain security.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Joining NATO, that was like a huge guarantee of protection against any, potential threats from Russia. And then the EU, think about the economic opportunities that opened up.
So it was about ideals.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's a very practical side to it.
Totally.
And for a while, it seemed like they were all in on this whole democratic path. I mean, look at them. They're participating in EU decisions, supporting Ukraine, like from the get-go. They even hosted U.S. troops, missile defense systems, the whole 9 yards.
They did. They were really active.
Right.
And then things started to shift a little bit.
Yeah, around 2015, right? The Law and Justice Party,
Yeah.
They came into power.
Yeah.
And things got kind of complicated.
They did. And this period, a lot of people started talking about democratic backsliding.
Democratic backsliding, what's that mean?
Essentially, it's when a government starts taking actions that kind of chip away at democratic institutions and those democratic norms.
Okay.
Like a weakening, like the judicial reforms they put in place. Those were really controversial.
Okay, so break it down. Yeah. Judicial reforms, what's the issue?
Well, the reforms gave the government way more control over appointing judges and disciplining them, too.
Oh.
A lot of critics were worried that this totally messed with the balance of power, the separation of powers, the judicial independence that's super important in a democracy, right?
Right, yeah.
It started to look like it would be easy for the ruling party to influence what the courts decided.
That's not good.
It wasn't good, and the EU agreed.
Yeah, I remember they got sanctioned. Right?
The EU saw those reforms as a direct threat to the rule of law.
I also remember at this time there was stuff about press freedom being limited and just like this rise in nationalist rhetoric.
Yeah, for sure. So there are definitely limits put on media outlets, particularly those that were, critical of the government. And the rhetoric coming from the PS, it started to target certain groups, like LGBTQ plus folks.
Yeah.
Which obviously that raised a lot of concerns about discrimination, intolerance, all of that.
So, okay, here's the thing. They're having all this tension with the EU, but at the same time, they're getting closer to governments that are also kind of known for their nationalist leanings, like Viktor Orban in Hungary. What's the connection there?
Yeah, that was really interesting. Both governments were pretty skeptical of what they saw as too much interference from Brussels.
Okay.
They really favored a much more nationalistic approach to making policies, and they weren't afraid to push back against some of those core EU values,
So basically they're finding friends who think like them, even if it means trouble with the EU.
You could say that. It just goes to show you how much internal politics can actually shake up a country's relationships with other nations.
Absolutely. But then fast forward to the 2023 elections. Donald Tusk comes back, new government. What happened?
It was like a U-turn. They immediately started reversing some of those PIS policies that were causing so much friction.
Like what specifically?
So they rolled back the judicial reforms, and they made a big effort to bring back independence to the media, and they really made it clear they wanted to re-engage with the EU, strengthen those alliances with Western Europe and the U.S.
So Poland swung back towards a more democratic path. What's the big takeaway here?
For me, it really underscores that a country's political journey, it's not set in stone. Things can change and evolve. It all depends on internal dynamics, what's going on within the country. And of course, leadership plays a huge role.
And the people, right.
Oh, for sure. It reminds us how important it is for people to be engaged, to participate in their democracy. Those institutions, they matter. They really can influence where a country's headed.
This whole deep dive, it's been pretty eye-opening. What should we be watching for as we see what happens in Poland moving forward?
I think it'll be interesting to see how these changes affect Poland's relationships within the EU. Like, can they fully repair those bridges? And internally, how will the new government handle the pretty deep political divisions that have emerged?
The point. It's definitely not the end of the story. There's so much more to uncover. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but keep exploring and join us next time for another fascinating look